Hi there, it's Life in Stages. I'm Joel Greenberg, and if you are joining us for the first time, thank you. Thank you for joining Life in Stages, the bi-weekly podcast where I am so lucky to be able to have conversations with many of Canada's finest actors, directors, writers, and most of all, people who have dedicated their professional careers to this work, and that takes a hell of a lot of strength and fortitude. For those of you who are return visitors, thank you, and thank you for coming back. Thank you for telling everybody you know about us so that we can just keep adding to our listenership. Today, I'm going to be speaking with Ron Lea, and Ron and I have worked together. We've spent a fair amount of time outside of rehearsal talking to each other. And Ron's background, well, Ron will speak for himself because he knows far better what he's done and why he's done it and how he does it much better than I. So welcome, Ron.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, sure. It really is a pleasure. And, you know, one of the things that this podcast certainly allows me, and I think allows both of us, is that when we're rehearsing something, if we are in rehearsal, there isn't time for this informal and easy back and forth. Certainly, I become preoccupied with the daily schedule and knowing where I would like to end up or how much we have. I mean, all those things. And I'm so grateful for having the opportunity to not even think about that and to just have us talk to each other. And so maybe we can begin. You've been performing for a long time, and I'm curious where this started. I mean, was this part of your youth or your upbringing, or was that a family-focused issue?
No, actually, it wasn't. I'm essentially, for a very, very long time, I was the only individual on the Italian side and on the English side that was in the arts. And I got the usual, from mom and dad, and understandably going, make sure you got something to fall back on. What is this, So it really started for me. I think I was very inspired. I was very lucky. We grew up on St. Urban Street, not Mordecai's St. Urban, further north where our beloved Montreal Expos used to play in that area.
Yeah.
And we were renting, and below us was sort of like a third cousin, my friend Michael, who worked at Capitol Records. So I was very fortunate in that Michael introduced me to a lot of great music. Mm-hmm. He had wall-to-wall albums. So I was very inspired by music at a very young age. I mean, thanks to him, I was very lucky. My first band when I was 10 was The Who at the Forum in Montreal.
Wow.
And then, of course, the second concert he took me to, which really I think hit me more than anything else, was I got to see James Brown at the Paul Sauvé. And I've spoken about this when there's been Q&As after a play that I was involved in. And so it sort of started there because I was just so taken with the live performance and the communication between audience and performer. And certainly if anybody has had the pleasure of seeing James Brown, they would definitely understand.
Yeah.
I didn't really do anything when it came to high school. There was nothing other than playing music with my friends, being in a band. The theater thing started up in Cégep. I was at a school called the New School of Dawson College. It was the first of its kind or whatever in Canada. We occupied two buildings on Avenue des Pins in Montreal, two beautiful mansions that were former embassies. And I'll never forget bringing my mother there. And she just was like, okay, all right. Well, good luck on this. So it started there. It was actually a lady by the name of Mira Fashin, who had written a play, and I thought she asked me to be part of it. So I just thought that we would just do a reading for, the public. But what ended up happening was that yes, we ended up rehearsing it and then doing it in front of the people at the school, and the response was really quite powerful. And I really like that because I do remember again going to concerts and just the audience's response to what was happening on stage. So I ended up working more in theater at CEGEP at the new school.
Mhm.
A wonderful lady from London, England, Margot Johansson, was my teacher. And that's where the fire started for me.
Huh.
It was there.
Mhm.
And then I did 2 years of that at the new school. And then I went to Concordia. And I wasn't crazy about the program at Concordia, so I left after a year.
Mhm.
At a very young age, I traveled across the country. And then I came back and I auditioned for the National Theatre School and got in and graduated from NTS. And when everybody sort of left for Toronto, as one was wont to do
Yeah.
at that time, it was either Stratford or Shaw, I remained in Montreal.
Okay.
And I was very happy that I did. We started up a theater company. Um, Maurice Padre decided to finally hire Montreal actors. So that helped.
Yeah.
And stayed in, and I did a lot of work in Montreal, voice work, theater work, film work. I started to work in French, which was great. And then left in 87 with my beloved wife and our very, very young girls who were two at the time. And we moved to Toronto at that point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm originally from Montreal too, but I left Montreal in '71.
Whew.
I mean, I left as soon as I was finished school. Uh,
Yeah.
Not even. I mean, it never occurred to me that I would leave because I didn't know people who had left, and
Right.
but coins in my head sometimes drop quite late, and I sort of looked around and said, "Oh, I mean, Montreal. There was. I mean, Centaur Theatre, Morris's theatre was it." And as you said, he was very clear about the fact I would probably never work there. And said, well, even if I did, I mean, it's one theater, so this is not a career, and that's what I wanted. So I ended up I ended up coming to Toronto, uh, in '71.
Joel,
Yeah.
did the Sadie Bronfman ever look at you?
No, at that point, I mean, the Sadie Bronfman Theater was sort of on and off. Marion Andre was running it, but I'd have to, I guess, look back or see. It seemed to me that it was a kind of on again, off again operation, unlike it is now, where it's been, quite substantial and has been, I'm sure, for quite a number of years. But the thing about Montreal for me was always, when I left. I didn't get to work in Montreal until it was probably about 98 or 99. And it was the year after Morris left Centaur.
Hmm.
Uh, I don't, he was very, he taught me, and he was extremely supportive and enthusiastic about my energy and my drive, but not enough to actually bring me into the company. So I got to Montreal late. I always thought it would be terrific to work there, and it was for a little while. And I had the opportunity, but no, it's not for lack. It is not for lack of trying that I haven't been able to add the Sadie Bronfman Center or the Siegel Center, as it now is, to my esteemed resume. But thank you for asking. So you're now clearly, I know that you're bilingual and I know you work in both languages. Was that part of your upbringing? Were you in that language from a young age?
I was very fortunate in that my mom and dad got it very early
Mm-hmm.
because my dad was never really fluent in French by any means.
Yeah.
My mom could speak three languages,
Okay.
and they sent me to French school when I was very young.
Right.
So not for a couple of years. So I think that really helped. And also the area that we grew up in was predominantly French as well.
Hmm.
So I sort of picked up French on the street.
Yeah.
I would watch French TV shows,
Hmm.
and certainly as a kid, I would watch Babino. Um, so, yeah, I was sort of surrounded by that. And I think when I would be with the Italian side of my family, um, three languages was, usually spoken at the table.
Okay. Yeah.
So I think that helped a great deal.
Hmm.
And so I got better at it, and I became more confident in it.
Hmm.
And I think when I got my sort of the big thing that happened was that I did a show there back in 1995. It was a very interesting time because it was the second referendum in Quebec,
Yeah.
and we remember how close that was.
Hmm.
Um, but I never had any idea um, what the response would be. And the show was called Omerta, La Loi du Silence, and it was overwhelming.
Hmm.
I just, I think we as Canadian actors don't, and I separate Quebec from that because it's
Yeah.
very different.
Hmm.
We just don't, we just don't, it just really never happens in the rest of the country.
What is it
But
that never? What doesn't happen?
well, I mean, they really respect uh, their artists in Quebec.
Hmm.
They have a star system that is not obsessive like it may be down in the United States.
Hmm.
They watch their work, and of course, they're surrounded by a sea of English. It's understandable. And I think the government, way back when, uh, understood that they really had to promote their culture
Yeah.
um, in every way they could. So they started that. The support from all governments there has always been very strong.
Hmm.
Um, and of course, witness the exceptional talent that has come out of Quebec that is worldwide. So, doing Omerta, even the process of auditioning was very different from what I had experienced in English.
Hmm.
When I met the director of Omerta, Pierre Roule, um, I wasn't in there for 5 minutes. He spoke to me. He wanted to know about me. He wanted to know about Toronto because I had moved by then.
Hmm.
And so we had a great conversation. And then he said, okay, let's try this. So I read this and he went, okay, that's good. I'm going to give you some notes. He gave me some notes, very specific. Read it again. He said, okay, let's try this one. So I read and it was just a beautiful experience. So I was in there for like a half hour.
Yeah.
Um, he was very welcoming, and lo and behold, like less than 2 weeks later, um, he called me directly. That never happens,
Hmm.
and just said, "Well, I can see you in both roles. Pick one." Now that never happens,
Hmm. Yeah.
and I'm glad that the role I chose, went through the 3 years that the show was on. So it was a beautiful experience, but I had never realized or whatever until the actual show got on the telly and the numbers went through the roof.
Hmm.
And it even wasn't the biggest show in Quebec. You still had more than half the population watching the show.
Right.
The biggest show at the time was La Petite Vie, which was drawing like an audience of 75% or something. It was just extraordinary.
Hmm.
And to this day, I mean, the show came down almost 20 years ago.
Yeah.
No, remember, almost 30 years ago.
Hmm.
And I will still at times be in the streets of Montreal and people will be going, hey, Gino, comment ça va, Steve? They'll still remember that character from way back when and stuff. And I think that also helped me get other roles in Quebec.
Hmm.
And I think also, too, is that I haven't had to audition very much in Quebec in French. They usually call and just say, would Ron be interested? We'll send him the script. Please tell us, what he thinks, because we would love to have him in the show.
Yeah.
So the experience in French has been wonderful. The support I've received from the Quebecois actors has been exceptional.
Mhm.
They certainly don't have the budgets that they have even in Toronto or Vancouver for Canadian shows,
Mhm.
but they make it work. And yes, they've got to move at a clip, but I never feel stressed on set.
Mhm.
Um, they never get nitpicky about the French unless, there's certain things that have to be corrected, which I understand. Um, so the experience so far, and I hope I get to do it again and again,
Mhm.
has been very enriching.
Oh, that's wonderful. Is that does that apply to theater as well as television and film?
I the process, are you talking about working in French theater or
Yeah,
English?
yeah. Working in French in Montreal or in Quebec.
Well,
Yeah.
I have never worked in French theater, unfortunately,
Okay.
but I know that their process is very different there, Joel.
Right.
They don't have a standard 4 week rehearsal period, right?
Yeah.
Or
Hmm.
3 weeks, or,
Yeah.
and of course, we both know it's sometimes less than 3 weeks.
Yeah.
We've both been through that. There, it's because they understand that you're not paid for rehearsal.
Hmm.
You're paid per performance in Quebec
Right.
because they also realize that the actors have to earn a living.
Hmm.
So the rehearsal period could be spread out over, you know, a few months
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
stuff. And they will find ways to get together to do it together. And probably in the last week or two, or whatever, then it's
Hmm.
really concentrated and they're
Hmm.
ready. So yeah, the process is very, very different there. Um, but certainly the theater that I've seen there has been very, very, very good, very
Yeah.
solid.
Yeah. I mean, when you were talking about the support that you get and the sense of, um, the sense of the culture and the pride, I mean, I had an experience in Quebec, not working there, but I was about to be directing a play. The English title is You Will Remember Me.
Oh yes, yeah.
And uh,
Was it the Tremblay place? The Tremblay play.
no, Francois, this is awkward. Francois. Anyway,
Yeah.
it had been done. I knew it had been done in Montreal and then the same production was brought back in Montreal, and I knew I was going to be directing it in Toronto. We did it at Tarragon, and I wanted to see it. And I went to Montreal to see the play, and I had written to the director of the play beforehand, asking if I could meet him. Whenever there's an opportunity to meet with the writer or the
Mhm.
play, particularly the writer and the director of an original production or of the first production, I'm very um, I'm very clear about saying any shortcuts. I mean, is there stuff like there danger signs I should be aware of, or like just tell me give me as much
Mhm.
information as you can. And certainly when you're doing a play, when we were doing it, it was an in English translation, but the play was already formed, so there wasn't going to be a writer or the translator working with us. It was just the play. I really wanted to see it, so I had arranged that I would meet the director after the performance, and the playwright was going to do his best to be there as well. So I went to see it, and it was in French, and I knew French somewhat. I certainly was not able to. I said, "Oh wow, this is this is beyond me." Although I know the play really well, so I know what's going on, but I'm not in the world. I'm not in the world of this language, and the audience was just wild in its response to the play. It was being, in a small theater. I think it was Théâtre Katsu. Uh,
Mhm.
all ages, all types of people in the audience. It wasn't, I've had that experience in Toronto, though not that often. And
Mhm.
knowing that we were going to be doing the play at Tarragon, and I know that I felt that I knew the Tarragon audience pretty well, and that this was a completely different experience, and the boisterous response from the audience was certainly not something I was that accustomed to in Toronto. But my point is that afterward, everybody in the production was told that I was going to be there. And I felt like I was greeted as though I was somebody, like they really wanted to meet me. And they really wanted to talk about the play, and they really wanted to talk about the play in English and how that would work. I've never had that. I wish I could say it's just like every production I do in Toronto or
Yeah.
elsewhere in the country. So to your point about how different it is, I'm taking up too much of your time, but it was inspiring to say, well, there is a place where people can be this visceral and this enthusiastic about the art that they are creating, because that's what it was about. Um,
I
so,
got to tell you, you're absolutely right. When I was at NTS, and of course you had the English section, you had the French section.
yeah,
We always could hear the French actors. I mean, there was a an energy there.
yeah.
In the lunchroom or whatever. It was unbelievable. And I remember seeing a play of the graduating students. What a class that was
Hmm.
on the French side, and it was a play by Dario Fo,
Hmm.
and it filled the Monument National at the time. And, I didn't understand everything that was, every word that was happening on that stage, but my God, it was so extraordinary. And of course, if you get a sense of history of Quebec, the church was very strong in Quebec for a very long time.
Yeah.
Well, this piece by Dario Fo was, he really goes after the church.
Hmm.
So there was reactions in that audience where, uh, I mean, there was booing, there was yelling, there was applause. The standing ovation at the end was like, even though, I mean, there were people walking out, but, the ovation went on for like 10, 15 minutes. It was unbelievable. I had never experienced that ever before.
Yeah.
Um, and I just was like, "Ooh, this is it.
Yeah.
This is why we do it. This is,
Hmm.
that communication between audience and um, and performer. There's just nothing like it. And when it's right, when it's working, I mean, I love cinema, I love TV, and but boy, oh boy, the live experience,
Yeah.
when it's right, you can't touch it.
Yeah. So you've arrived in Toronto in '87. Did you did you know did you have many connections in Toronto, or were you arriving fairly unformed?
No, I definitely had good friends in Toronto who had moved previously.
Okay.
Um, the first agent that signed me, I was able to meet with her because a number of her clients were also good friends. So,
Right.
making the move, even though I sort of left kicking and screaming because the first move is always the toughest,
Hmm.
you know, and I love Montreal. I always will. It'll always feel like home to me.
Yeah.
So I'm thankful to my wife. It certainly wasn't easy, and our daughters were two at the time. Um, so coming into the city, this city was, yes, it was daunting, but certainly not as daunting as it was when we moved to Los Angeles back in the late '90s and
Oh,
stuff.
okay. Okay. So we will talk about that. So when you came to Toronto, when you started, were you uh, was your work mostly in one area? Was it theater? Was it TV? Was it film? Or were you able to do a wide range?
I think, yeah, when I first got into Toronto, um, to break into any of the theaters, be it Tarragon, Factory at the time, Can Stage,
Mhm.
um, it wasn't easy. It was very, it took me a while to sort of um, for that to happen. So I ended up, what always happens is you leave a city and you end up going back to the city you left,
Right.
because I was still very fortunate in that um, they would bring me in for shows at Centaur.
Hmm.
I think I also did a show at the Sadie as well. So it took a while before things broke in Toronto. I
Right.
ended up co-producing a couple of one-act plays at the Tarragon Extra Space.
Hmm.
a playwright by the name of Vittorio
Oh
Rossi,
yeah.
because I had done Vittorio's number of Vittorio's plays back in Montreal,
Yeah.
and we put our own money into it,
Hmm.
and this was during the Jays' first go at the World Series, which they won back in
Right.
'92.
Uh-huh.
And I thought, oh my, nobody's going to show up because everybody's watching Toronto. We actually broke even,
Wow.
and we got good reviews.
Hmm.
So that was really uh, inspiring,
Yeah.
and it's sort of it's the first play. I'm just trying to think. Ended up doing True West at Tarragon
Hmm.
that Richard Greenblatt directed that I did with Hardy Lynham.
Hmm.
That was an experience working with someone as I loved working with Hardy and Richard as well. Um, and then I think sort of the break for me where it was really exciting was that I auditioned for the Motel plays, George
Hmm.
F. Walker's The
Yeah.
Motel plays.
Hmm.
And George was there with Ken Gass. And I mean, really honestly, I had the same way when I first auditioned for you.
Hmm.
So I thought, I just do a really good audition, Ron, because hopefully down the line they might think about you, and maybe. So when I first auditioned for George, I read for this particular role, and then he went, "You know what? Why don't you read for this role as well?" So I read for this other role, and within days, I got a call saying, "Do you want to come and do it?"
Hmm.
I was over the moon because I love Walker as a playwright, and and so I ended up working at the factory
Yeah.
doing adult entertainment
Hmm.
and
And
it
that's the
was
title of a play.
adult entertainment,
Yes.
exactly, yes. It's quite a piece of work. I mean, I love
Yeah.
the Motel
Yeah.
plays.
Hmm.
um, so I broke at factory. I was able to do something at Tarragon. It wasn't until um, doing Studio 180 and Can Stage doing Sweat that I was able to work at Can Stage.
Hmm.
um, So I found my way through different theaters in the city.
Yeah.
Um, worked at some independent theaters. Absolutely, I would have loved to have done more theater in the city, but it's not easy.
Yeah. No, it's not. Uh, there aren't that many theaters. All the theater. I mean, there is. I don't. I think I'm correct in saying there isn't a single theater in the city that is a kind of for rent space. All the theaters, all the venues are bases for theater companies. Uh, so, when I was with Studio 180, it was occasionally you could rent a space because a theater would have an open time slot, but mostly it was partnering and co-producing, which was, with few exceptions, far more fulfilling than a standalone and doing things all on our own. We're not a big company. Uh, no, it is hard. And I remember when I arrived in Toronto, uh, I I knew one person here, and I had seen, just before I moved here, I had seen at what was then Toronto Workshop Productions, which is now where Buddies is,
Yeah.
George Luscombe's production of the Chicago Seven, and I'd never seen anything like it. It was just spectacular. And that's where I wanted to work. And at the time I thought I was still interested in acting, though I think I knew I had been directing more. But I called Mr. Luscombe, and really what I wanted to do was, my plan was to ask him if I could assist directing and just learn from him how he did what he created, because I had no idea how you get that, how you create that. And I met him one day. He answered his own phone. I mean, I knew nothing about the Toronto scene. And I went to the theater. I said, "Oh, yeah, well, of course he answered his own phone. There's nobody in the building but him." And we were chatting, and he said, "Okay, go up there and do something for me." And armed with no confidence whatsoever, and not, it didn't occur to me to say, "I'm not here because I don't want to act. I want to work with you." I didn't say that. So I got up and did something that I remembered from something, and he thanked me. And That was my moment at Toronto Workshop Productions. Um, so it is no, it is a rough. It can be, Then I don't know if it's changed. Then also the first professional work I did in Toronto was a musical, and after that, when I contacted, it was then Toronto Free Theatre before it became Canadian Stage, but Guy Sprung was the artistic director, and I knew him very passingly from Montreal. And
Yeah.
I contacted him and I said, I want to do something here. He said, yeah, but we don't do musicals. I said, well, I know that. I said, that's why I'm here. I love doing musicals as I did then. I said, but that's not the only thing I can do. Anyway, that took, it is hard. And it takes time. I mean, it really does. Well, it takes time, but I think more than that, it takes the capacity to not take no for an answer. And, in a world of rejections, it's, I think you learn pretty fast whether or not you've got the stamina or whether you can, do you want to spend your whole career being angry that people don't see what you believe you see yourself or any of that? I certainly understand it. So I didn't realize that you had moved to Los Angeles at some point. So why don't you talk about that, like how it happened and why, and what that was like?
It was very funny. We drove down, so with our daughters, we left in '97. It was a beautiful drive. It was a wonderful experience for all of us to be together. We stopped at various places down the way, and we got into Los Angeles, and it was at night, and we had rented a place way in advance. So, but it's Los Angeles. I'd never seen a 6-lane highway in my life.
Yeah.
It was terrifying. And the lights in the neighborhoods there, there's very little light. So we were trying to find our way to we had found a place in the valley in Van Nuys, and we ended up stopping at a gas station because I just needed to get some directions. We didn't have, the Waze app at the time and stuff. So while I was getting gas, a gentleman or whatever had seen our Ontario license plates and came running towards us saying, go back, get out of this country, go back, it's not good, go back. So that was our welcome to Los Angeles.
Yeah.
We finally found the place. I definitely had some high school friends who had been living down there. So that was really wonderful to know that we did know some people down there.
Yeah.
We got there, I believe, October 17th. We had to find a way to get our kids into schools. Not easy, because their term started in September, of course. So we thought we had found one. It was outside of Van Nuys. I mean, you got to, Los Angeles.
Yeah.
You have to drive everywhere.
Yeah. And everything is 20 minutes away from everything else, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And 3 hours later.
We got in there and we went to see the principal regarding our daughters. And I don't know if people remember the poster from Eraserhead, David Lynch's first movie. But basically the poster looked like the principal looked like him. Like he had just suffered electroshock.
Yes. Hair on fire.
Exactly. So we were speaking with him. The guy never blinked. And then while we were speaking with him, two guys from the LAPD walked in. They were taking the kids because these two kids had been spraying mace at each other. So we went, okay, we're not in Kansas anymore. And so we immediately knew, no, we're not going to put them here. And then we tried another school, and they were very welcoming. It was actually right around the block from where we lived, and they loved Canadians. And of course, it was very interesting in that our girls were the only white kids in the class, in the school.
Hmm.
It was Latinos and African Americans. So our daughters got a taste of what African Americans and Latinos have to go through on a daily basis.
Hmm.
We spoke with the teacher. I was shooting something, of course, kept happening. I was coming back to Canada to work, and one of the teachers said, "Your kids are so way ahead. You're wasting their time here." So we got them out of there. We had to put them in a private school. So that worked, So those were some of the, daily things we had to deal with.
Yeah.
Um, it Work wise, it did not go very well. LA is certainly not a theater town,
Hmm.
and I certainly didn't go down there for that. I think it was more the adventure of wanting to work, knowing, wanting to be in an industry where working with some exceptional people, and I wanted that opportunity.
Hmm.
Um, but you don't go down to Los Angeles when you're over 40.
Okay.
You
Yeah.
go down there when you're young,
Hmm.
and you got to put in the time, and you got to be patient. Um, I had an agent, I had a manager, um, but you know, getting auditions was not easy. I was there for a little over 3 years. I had 14 auditions in 3 years.
Wow. Oh God.
That's not very much.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's nothing. Believe it or not, they weren't big jobs, but I got 4 jobs out of the 14. Now, most actors in LA would say that's pretty damn good.
Yeah.
But no, clearly, it was tough. An actor that I had worked with on Street Legal in Toronto back in the early '90s, Gordy Clapp, who's a
Hmm.
wonderful actor.
Hmm.
Um, Gordy was doing NYPD Blue at the time. He said, "Ron, I'll get you to meet with them,"
Hmm.
and I did. And I remember calling him, and I asked him, he said, "Ron, they loved you. You're great, but there's 100,000 actors in Los Angeles." Um, and like anything, those producers have their friends and people
Right.
that they want to hire.
Yeah.
So they probably will get around to you at some point, but you're going to have to be patient and stuff. Um, thank God my wife was can do so many things so well. So she was doing working as a an assistant to a designer. So she was traveling. She was doing different projects and stuff. And I kept getting called to come back and do some stuff back in Canada.
Hmm.
And then it got to a point where, 3 years in, I was thinking I was working as a courier, and I was, not much was happening.
Hmm.
And so I basically said, I think maybe I'll head up to Vancouver for the summer, because, yeah, we need to work, we need the money.
Hmm.
And then it happened where I got a call to do a TV series in Montreal.
Okay.
And um, and so I ended up moving back to Montreal, moving back with my mom and dad.
Hmm.
And whatever money I was making on the TV series, which was not a great deal, I would just send it back um, to Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And the toughest thing was that I saw my kids once that year,
Wow. Wow.
and um, and saw my wife because we went to my cousin's wedding in Vancouver. So that distance and not being able to be with the family was really, really difficult.
Yeah.
And then at that time, I had met an actor down in Los Angeles who lived in our complex and stuff, Derek McGrath, very wonderful actor and comedian.
Hmm.
And Derek was helpful in getting me an audition for a show called Doc
Yeah. Hmm.
with Billy Ray Cyrus. And I auditioned and I ended up getting it.
Hmm.
But of course, where were they shooting it? In Toronto. And so like I said, my wife was doing quite well down there.
Hmm.
And I said, I got this show. I don't know if it's going to go. I think chances are it's going to go. It's probably going to go because it's not on a major network. Um, and of course it did.
Hmm.
And I said, um, I'm a regular on this. I'll be making some US money.
Hmm.
Um, so I'll be able to come down more often. And she said, you know, are we a family or are we not a family?
Yeah.
Um, so she ended up, they ended up coming back, and my kids were not very happy about it.
Yeah.
It's very easy to fall in love with California,
Hmm.
and we they had some really extraordinary experiences down there. And um, Jessica ended up studying at Cal Arts
Hmm.
in Los Angeles.
Hmm.
They both, Alexis and Jessica, our daughters, went to a summer program, California State School for the Arts,
Hmm.
2 years in a row. They just absolutely they learned so much. They got so much, and there was just something about the schooling down there that is specifically CISA and the California Cal Arts and stuff that was really special. So yeah, when we ended up moving back, it was really tough on them.
Yeah. How old were
Because
they?
when we ended up moving back, they were 87, 87, they were 14.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
And they had made friends, they had a group of people.
Sure.
So coming, and of course, when we got back, it was during the Mike Harris era.
Hmm.
So it was a mess, and the schooling system was a mess. And so, yeah, it took a while for them to sort of get back into this environment and stuff. But we got very lucky in that we found a school in Etobicoke
Hmm.
where we had moved to called School of Experience. It's called C School,
Hmm.
and that was a godsend.
Okay.
Yeah, it really was. So LA for me personally was not. I have no regrets about going there.
Yeah.
It was a life experience for all of us.
Hmm.
Uh, I, I feel for my wife because I think she was finding her way there,
Hmm.
and her work ethic and her intelligence and her creativity is amazing. And I see that with my daughters as well. So I wish that she could have stayed there because I think it would have been a lot more successful for her than it was for me.
Sure. Sure. No, I mean, I think you've probably answered it. I'm always curious to hear uh, people whose careers have been like yours, who do have families, who do have children, and what that is like. And I don't know, because that's the world I know as well. It may be in any career, as you become consumed with whatever the profession is, um, how you how you balance, if balance is the right word, but mostly how you deal with family. When I was freelancing a lot, and when uh, it it seems to me that in the 70s and 80s in Canada, with theater, which is the work that I've always done, you could sort of travel almost anywhere in the country, and it's I don't think it's like that anymore. I mean, I haven't done much of that in a long, long time, but then it wasn't unusual to be working away, and when you were working away, you could be away for anywhere from 3 to 8 or 9 weeks at a time. Uh, that's a hell of a lot of weight to leave at home, right? Um, so what? I mean, I don't know if you have anything more to add, because you've certainly talked a lot about dealing with very young children and then young teenagers. I mean, clearly at an extremely vulnerable stage of development.
You're absolutely right. I'm really glad that you bring up family because when our daughters were born, and of course we had twins, um, you go. I mean, I think you anticipate this is going to be overwhelming. I don't know that I can deal with this. How are we going to do it? And I remember there was a company that was started by Jack Langadike and the late Joe Casley,
Mm-hmm.
many years back or whatever, Montreal, called the Association of Producing Artists.
Mm-hmm.
And and my wife Ann was designing Pericles, and which ended up going to the Citadel in Edmonton. And she had Jessica in a front pouch and Alexis on the back pouch, and we just did it.
Yeah.
We found
Yeah.
ways, and of course, we had family in Montreal.
Yes.
And, you're talking about the grandmothers. I mean,
Yeah.
that's heaven for them.
Yeah.
So we had we have incredible families and incredibly supportive and stuff. But I hear what you're saying because there was a time when we could go across the country.
Hmm.
I remember working in Winnipeg, in Calgary, in Edmonton,
Yeah.
in Vancouver. And I remember, yes, my beloved wife had to take the brunt of that,
Hmm.
and especially, I remember one time in Los Angeles, I was working in Winnipeg and she called and she was in a serious car accident.
Hmm.
I mean, when she told me what happened, it was like I could have lost my wife
Hmm.
because she was on her way after work to pick up our daughters
Hmm.
at school, and the school was, a good 45 minutes to an hour away. And, it was a young couple that went through a red light.
Hmm.
Um, so it's you certainly don't want those moments to happen
Yeah.
ever.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, she had, certainly when I was away doing theater and stuff. Um, and you're right, Joel, you could be away for 8, 9 weeks. I remember when we had moved to Vancouver, we got into Vancouver, the phone rang, and it was my dear friend Brian saying, "Do you want to come and play at ATP in Calgary?" And I went, "Well, that's a lovely way to come into Vancouver. You have a job immediately."
Hmm.
And Brian and I went to school together and stuff. But I was in Calgary for 3 months,
Hmm. Hmm.
and it was great. I mean, Calgary, it's not far from Vancouver. I mean, it's an hour and a half flight and stuff. But again, it was. I mean, the girls were older then,
Hmm.
so that certainly helped. But yeah, we both know you spend a lot of time away.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
Yep. Um, yeah. And then the coming home sometimes isn't that easy, right? I mean, you've been away, you're used to a certain rhythm or a certain pattern, and then home and bang, you're in your other life. Um, so since like when when do you arrive back in Toronto, sort of permanently, if that?
Uh, we came back to Toronto, 2001,
Okay.
and we ended up staying till 2007.
Hmm.
Our daughters were both out in BC at the time, and my wife's family, all of them are out there in BC. We thought, oh, let's give Vancouver a try. Let's try the adventure and see what it's like. And our daughters are out there. We can be closer to them.
Hmm.
My wife can get reacquainted with her family at the same time. I can get to know her family a little bit more. The first year in Vancouver was tough. There was very little work in terms of TV and film in Vancouver. Um, there is there is not a great deal of theater work in Vancouver.
Hmm.
Um, I ended up doing some theater out there, some very rewarding theater actually. Um, I ended up doing a show with Green Thumb and ended up doing this wonderful play called The December Man by
Oh yeah.
Colleen Murphy.
Yeah. Hmm.
Um, and I ended up doing it in Winnipeg as well.
Hmm.
Um, but I didn't realize until when I moved out west, um, yes, this is a big country, but the attitude towards Toronto there
Hmm.
was like, really?
Yeah.
Like, chill out, please,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know? I mean, I still think that it occurs, and it's very funny because a lot of the actors that were sort of knocking Toronto came from Toronto, or had left Toronto to come out to BC and stuff. And I remember one actor I'd worked with who's, unfortunately, he's not alive anymore. We got along beautifully, and we went out for a beer one night, and he went, I got to tell you, I've really liked your work that I've seen you do on TV, and I was very thankful. And he said, but I got to tell you, when I saw you come into the audition room, and he said, I'm sorry, I'm admitting this, Ron, but oh, here's another guy coming from the East trying to take our jobs. And I
Hmm.
just went, okay, we got to stop this.
Yeah.
We have to
Yeah.
stop this.
Hmm.
We are Canadians.
Hmm.
I can tell you, I've lived in Toronto long enough. Nobody's bitter when an actor comes from out west, and gets work in Toronto or moves here.
Yeah.
Come on in. Absolutely. Right. I'm happy for any actor or whatever that gets work to begin with.
Hmm.
So, um, yeah, that divide definitely exists. I know, and I also know this as a Montrealer because I know that when um, at Centaur that yeah, most of the actors were coming in from Toronto,
Hmm.
and the local actors weren't being looked at. And I'm very thankful to Elsa
Hmm.
Bolam for telling Morris, "Will you go out and look at the local talent?"
Hmm.
And I think Morris eventually started to do that, and maybe budgetary went. Well, I guess I better start hiring actors in Montreal, which he did.
Yeah.
But I remember going to do Death of a Salesman in Winnipeg,
Hmm.
and getting in there for our reading, and I just could see the Winnipeg actors looking, "Who is this guy?"
Hmm.
Right? He's not a well-known Toronto actor,
Hmm.
and I got it
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
we had the same kind of thing that was happening in Montreal as well and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I will share two of my own stories, but they're related. I worked in Edmonton once, and I was directing a play called The Foreigner that I had seen in New York years before. Sweet little play, and the actors were from Calgary and Edmonton, and I was clearly the outsider. And one of the actors was pleasant. The others, I was just, I'm not here to prove anything. I didn't. I was hired to do this, so that wasn't. I didn't feel embraced by the
Yeah.
community. And then in Montreal, when I finally did get to work there in the late '90s, I worked at Centaur and I worked at Just for Laughs for a couple of summers. But the Centaur, I remember there was the woman who wrote the reviews for, I guess, the Gazette.
Pat Donnelly.
Yeah. So she was interviewing me when I was there to direct the first project. And she began her interviewing by saying, another Montrealer who ran away. And I said, by then I wasn't feeling the same intimidation I felt when I met George Luscombe. And I said, you know what? I wanted to have a career in theater. I said, Montreal and English Montreal, because I'm not, I would never have been able to get any work, nor would I have even tried to get work in French. Um, I said, that's a pretty unreasonable overview. I said, I just wanted to work. And, I left in 71 and it's now, whatever it was, 97, 98. I said, it's taken me this long to get back here. So maybe you can just give me a break. Um,
Yep.
and it was difficult. The actors all the actors were from Montreal, with the exception of one or two who I hired, and even that, the fact that you think we're not good enough. I said, oh, it's not that. I mean, the Montreal. Montreal is a small community of English actors, right? Uh, and mostly quite young. Anyway, that's hard. It's hard. Nobody wants to be the other or the outsider or reminded that they don't actually belong.
I totally agree with you. Yeah, I think we got lucky. Brian brought in myself and another actor from Montreal, even though I wasn't living in Montreal at the time.
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, we felt quite welcomed in Calgary by the actors that we were working with
Hmm.
because I mean, ultimately we're actors
Yeah.
and we have a story to tell,
Yeah.
and so work with each other. Why
Yeah.
work against each other? How is
Yeah.
that going to help you in any way?
Yeah.
I we got a taste of that too. I mean, I heard that a little bit when I had left Montreal and I'd come back, and
Mhm.
you know, uh, from a couple of people, but for the most part, anytime I'm back, I'm always welcome with open arms, and I still have very, very
Mhm.
close friends
Yeah.
there who I love and respect. But yeah, believe me, it also happens on the French side too. I was talking
Mhm.
to an actor in Montreal who works in both languages,
Mhm.
and she had some, you know, fairly, she did some pretty big projects in Quebec,
Mhm.
and then she ended up getting, a job where she was a regular on a series in LA.
Mhm.
And that show didn't, I think it went a year, maybe two, and got canceled.
Mhm.
But she got a very frosty welcome when she came back to Quebec.
Mhm.
Like, how
Yeah.
dare you leave us? And you
Yeah.
go,
Yeah.
we're artists,
Yeah.
right? I doubt that they're telling Robert Lepage that,
Hmm. Yeah.
you know,
Probably.
or
Probably
the
not.
late Jean Machiavelli for going down,
Yeah.
or Denis Villeneuve,
Yeah.
I think they're very proud of their artists to know that they have achieved this kind of success. Um, uh, so, no, I mean, that's, we do it for the world.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're coming. We're approaching the finish line. But have you? Do you? I mean, you've worked in all the areas, and I'm not asking you to vote, which is like, or to rank them, but what is it like when you move from theater to film to TV and back? Does anything, is it now so ingrained in you that you don't actually think about the distinctions?
I The distinctions usually hit me when I'm back in the theater.
Okay.
When I had the pleasure of working with you on Asher Lev,
Hmm.
um, just recently doing in 7 days at the Harold Green.
Hmm.
Um, we brought it, we brought it in from London, Ontario.
Hmm.
I had never met or worked with any of the cast there before. I had never worked with Phil Aiken before.
Hmm.
I mean, in the same way, I had worked with Jonas in Death of a Salesman, and it was thanks to Jonas that he
Yeah.
was able to introduce me to you. I will forever cherish that experience. Um, so again, the process,
Hmm.
and I don't think there's never enough time to rehearse, but the process of going from A to B to C,
Yeah.
discussion, all of that. Um, I you just don't get that in TV and film.
Right.
It's
Right.
really rare when you do
Hmm.
because of budgetary reasons or something. I mean,
Hmm.
unless you're a lead in a big project where they've got time and you can have those chats. And I'm not saying it's not possible. Of
Yeah.
course, you can do that in TV and film.
Hmm.
I've certainly worked with directors in TV, which is can be quite a bit. It's a lot faster,
Hmm.
where they will go and they will sit with the actors and they will at least get them juiced for the scene, talking about So you go in there, but so often it's about we got to move to the next thing, and also usually the writing in the theater is usually much much better. I'm not saying, believe me, I mean we've both seen and I've been part of projects where the writing is quite exceptional in the cinema and in the TV. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, for me it's what you develop as a cast,
Hmm.
your work with the director, and then you're going in front of an audience and you know um, it's like when when I was researching Death of a Salesman, uh, I watched an interview. I think it was with Brian Dennehy and Charlie Rose,
Hmm.
and you know, Charlie Rose asked Brian something about, "Do you feel the audience you hear?" And he went, "Oh, yes, man, yes." And I remember that moment in the second act of Death of a Salesman when I was doing it at WJT, and Willie has that whole speech about I'm not a piece of orange, right? There was a man in the audience who went up, "Don't do this to Willie, don't do this to him." And I've never heard, I mean, that visceral,
Yeah. Yeah.
like when I saw Oleana in New York City,
Mhm.
and they were yelling at the actors, right? I mean, the characters,
Yeah,
anyways.
yeah.
Like had that uh, reaction, when you went to see the French play and stuff.
Hmm.
So, yeah, there's still something about the theater that it's will always be special to me.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Ron. This has been really delightful, and I've learned a lot more about you than I than I knew before we started. So that's always good.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for your time, and thank you for being so open to this conversation.
Joel, it's my absolute pleasure. Anything that I can do, always feel free to reach out.
Okay.
And I've told many people about A Life in Stages.
Hmm.
So we'll try and keep increasing your audience all the time. My girls are certainly going to watch it down in Melbourne. And my love to you and your family.
I thank you, and you've provided a perfect segue. Uh, for me to extend my thanks to everybody who's listening. And if you are first time listeners, please come back. Please consider following or subscribing. And you can find Life in Stages wherever you find your podcasts. And tell your friends, tell anybody who you know. And in addition, in order to help us keep the podcast going, I am asking if you would consider donating to Life in Stages. And you do that by going to patreon.com, patreon.com/Life in Stages. And there are instructions there for how to donate if you are so inclined. This is not a monetized podcast. There is no membership. So we will keep this podcast going as long as there are listeners who care enough. Thank you all. And I look forward to our next guest. Bye-bye.